Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. We are back with another episode, and on this episode, I have with me Nixo, Executive Director of EthStaker. By now, I hope everyone is very familiar with Nixo, my dear friend, and someone I love having on the show. I love having her on all the time. How's it going, Nixo?
It's going great. I just moved into a brand new apartment this morning.
Wow, it looks great. It looks like you have all the Infinite Jungle swag, all the plants,
I
and it
tried to
looks
move
so
all the plants
bright.
to the background.
Yeah,
It's
for the
very
show
bright. I
especially.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it all natural light?
Yeah, it's all natural light. I'm sitting right in front of the window and I've got like a beautiful, like French looking building view. And it's just the sun is shining right in. It's great.
I love that. Also, I love the colors. It's like geometrically, like you've got the turquoise, the yellow, the gray. It's
Isn't
unique.
it great? Yeah, I love it. I'll be here
Nice.
for at least 5 months, which is awesome because I'm like slow matting right now. So I'm not used to being in the same bed for a very long time. So I'm excited to be here for a while.
5 months. 5 months sounds like the shortest time ever. If I'm doing the hassle of moving, I'm gonna stay there for literally 10 years. I mean, but I understand that the nomad life is very different. It's just like that's
I
a lot. Moving is
I don't
kind of
think I've
tricky.
been I don't think I've been in the same place for more than 30 days in like 2.5 years.
Oh dang. All right.
It's
That yeah.
tiring, honestly.
That sounds exhausting. I'm glad you're staying in one place, young lady. um, okay. Well, I suppose we should get started and talk about some updates to the Ethereum staking ecosystem. I wanted to start off our conversation with probably one of the biggest things that people have been talking about over the last couple of weeks on the Twitterverse, on the crypto Twitter, and that's issuance, changes to validator issuance. We've talked about this before, and my takeaway is that probably nothing's going to happen for Electra related to issuance, and it just seems overblown because it just doesn't seem that important to me, and that like I don't think it's going to impact validators immediately. So I can understand why we're talking about it now, but I'd love to hear your thoughts too on how you think the conversation has changed or like progressed over the last couple weeks. Sounds like more people are against it. Like more people have spoken up, I guess. Way more people have spoken up about how they don't want this to happen, about how they don't want staking rewards to go down. But I don't know. I mean, have you thought that the tone of the conversation has changed, and maybe if you think it's more important than I do?
Here's my first of all, I'm going to say I'm strongly in support of something going into Electra.
Oh,
I I know that like people, I think in my position who support it haven't been as loud as the people who are against it. And I think that's normal because crypto Twitter is sort of dominated by these loud voices that people trust. That like people follow on Twitter because they're usually a very good sense of what's going on without having to delve too deep. And I think a lot of these voices are strongly against it for reasons that are their own, the reasons that are legitimate. But I really liked a take that I saw from a core dev, which was when I see an argument, and on one side, it's a bunch of people who have been doing research into this area for years and don't really have like a financial incentive for it to go either way. And on the other side, I see people who are going to be affected. It kind of goes to show that like what are the motivations for each person's argument? Because everybody who I've seen has been speaking out against it is either directly financially affected. So this hits their bags in some way that is like a very legitimate reason, unpredictable. It could either lower their issuance if they're a staker, which for obvious reasons people want to push against if they're staking. It could impact the way that other people, regulators, BlackRock, like people getting into staking, Coinbase see staking, which impacts their bag in a very different way than if you're a staker. Um, but yeah, on the other side, you have these researchers doing a lot of who have been looking into this for years and are now saying that this is something we need to look at urgently, something that is important Um, and I think their timing is actually pretty good. So in January, Anders, who is a researcher, put out a post on targeting. And the thing is, there are a couple of EF researchers who, when they post something, I feel like I have to set aside like 3 or 4 days to like really read what they're saying, and like even then, I might not get a solid grasp on it. And like it's because some of these people have been diving in for so long that like their posts get highly technical really quickly, and it pushes a lot of people out. So when Anders posted this targeting post in January, it honestly did not get that much traction. It was exactly the topic that we're talking about now, like about whether or not we should lower issuance or target some number, but it was just so technical that it didn't get a lot of community engagement at all. And then Caspar and Ansgar came in with this super accessible post, and it got a lot more traction. It got a lot more community engagement. And then the absolute king of communication in EF research, Mike Neuter, came in and published his own thing, which was extremely accessible. And then all of a sudden, people were able to read this thing. And the one of the problems with that is that they read Mike Neuter's post and then don't read any of the things that he has linked or any of the data or research. So like one of the things that I've seen are people saying like there's not enough data behind this, there's not enough research behind this. And I'm like, well, you haven't actually, like, if you look at Anders' posts, especially the one he posted 4 days ago, there is a lot of data in there. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of research, there are charts, there are graphs, there are numbers, there are math equations. But a lot of what I'm seeing is a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to something that's like, yes, it's scary. You're going to change the monetary policy of Ethereum. You better have a damn good reason to do that, because this is going to affect everything that we've been fighting for. It's going to affect the narrative. It's going to affect everything that like people trust about Ethereum. And you better have a damn good reason. And right now, what they're being told on crypto Twitter is that like there's no reason. There's no reason for anybody to do this. There's no math behind this. There's no data behind this. And that's I don't think that I don't think that's true. That's not true. Whether or not it's sufficient data and research is arguable.
But that's what I thought. I thought there wasn't data and research for this, and that like if we want something to go into Electra, there has to be a concrete threshold. There has to be like a number that developers are targeting. And in Ansgar and Casper's post, I think that they had said, at current level stake, why don't we reduce it by 30%? Like a really easy change, doesn't require a ton of complexity, but let's just reduce it by 30% and see what happens. That is just awful to me. Like, what?
Yeah.
You have no idea how like clearly people are saying it's going to impact people, and who knows if it's going to actually help the solo staker, and we don't even know. We know for sure that 30% is not the end game, so we know that there's going to have to be another change to issuance that is a little bit more dynamic perhaps. But like, if we want a change to go into Electra, there has to be a specific number. And so far, the number that I've been given and the rationale behind it is kind of weak. So like, what is
Yeah.
the number, and what exactly are people trying to push into Electra, and like why? Like, where is the data behind that one?
So that is where this becomes arguable. So Caspar and Ansgar posted two different things. One was a better explainer of Anders' targeting research. One was a proposal for Electra. The Electra one just reduced issuance, and that's all it does. It's actually really really mild. In the context of targeting, it's very mild. All it does is reduce issuance as we get further along the stake supply timeline. Um, and so the number that they're targeting, 25% or whatever, that is where it's sort of like, I don't know, we need to buy some time, so I don't know what this number should be, but I know it should be lower. But it doesn't actually target. So the Elector proposal doesn't actually target anything. Their proposal in the first, their explainer of targeting sort of threw 25% out there, but the reduction is also just, yeah, you're right. It's throwing a dart out there and saying like, we think we should reduce it. We know that we need to do something about the fact that we are on track to get to 100% staked, and there is no reason that that should change. And that's also something, it's difficult to get data on the future, and so people are arguing like, well, how do you know it's going to get to 100% staked? Like, I think Eric on Twitter randomly threw out a number that said like, I think we're going to level out at 31%, and like, where that, I don't know where that 31% came from, because what we've shown is that the amount staked has just been up only since the launch of the beacon chain. The lowest economic security that we've ever had in proof of stake was at the merge. And that was only because that's when the beacon chain started being our consensus mechanism. And so since then, it has just been up and up and up. And like the slope of that line hasn't significantly changed. It's not like as time has gone on, there's been less and less demand. There, we have seen events where it is higher, like when Chapella happened, and there was just less. There was less risk to staking. There was a little bit more of an incline in that slope, but there were also withdrawals. And so there's no reason to think that the staking supply that's being staked, or the ETH supply that's being staked, levels off anytime soon.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think logically it also makes sense. Like, if you are not staking your ETH, you're essentially being diluted out of what you're holding, and it's so damn easy to stake. There's no reason why you shouldn't stake your ETH. I mean, the only thing is that might have prevented people from staking their ETH is, oh, well, if I have to stake my ETH, then I lock it up and I can't use it to go buy NFTs or do all this stuff. But now you don't even have that issue because you can just liquid stake it, and then you get a liquid staking token, and then you can still play around with it and do whatever you want. So the barrier to entry is really low. So I agree. I think that like staking will most likely continue to rise, and I understand that developers are very worried that if that happens, then all of it goes to, a liquid staking provider like Lido. But again, it seems like throwing out a random number for Electra is a knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, this is getting too much. Like, let's just see if this works. And it does. I don't think that that's the best way to go about it. And even the long-term proposal that Casper and Ansgar had presented is primarily a proposal saying, we need to do more research on this. Like, we need to figure out what the target staking ratio is, how we actually, implement a issuance schedule that can achieve like the target staking rate that we want. Like, if it is 25% of total ETH staked, then like, how do we like achieve that? And then we'll need some other proposals to change like stake distribution. So I know Vitalik had put out a post saying, why don't we increase, the penalties for correlated slashing events? So if you're a large
Not
provider,
even
then like,
correlated slashing. It's so we already have correlated slashing. It's correlated offline penalties, which
oh, okay. So like you're
amazing.
offline at the same time. Yeah, you get penalized
Yeah.
at a higher rate if you're a larger validator. Yeah, I think that like would definitely very targeted like policies that impact large stakers as opposed to smaller stakers. But I'm I don't see the rationale. I don't see how it should. I don't think it should be easy to change the issuance. And if there is an issuance change that goes into Electra, purely for the rationale of it just needs to be smaller, like lower in some amount, that I think would look very poorly on Ethereum as a decentralized blockchain. Like
I
for the
honestly,
rationale.
I don't get it. What, like, why does decreasing the issuance seem like such a negative? So basically, one of the things that I've heard is people saying like the SEC is going to look at us changing the staking issuance and be like, wow, these people are just like willy-nilly changing things. And so like, why would we approve some sort of blockchain that can change things so rapidly and on a whim? But the thing is, like, what the SEC is supposed to do, is like meant to do, arguably, is supposed to protect investors. And what we're seeing right now is this sort of like system that's being built in Ethereum staking where things are being and excuse my use of this word because people get really people treat it like it's really controversial, but people are leveraging risk on top of risk on top of risk. And you can argue whether or not it's technically leverage in the financial system, but like the fact is you are taking a staking yield, and then on top of that staking yield you're taking some sort of restaking yield. You've got MEV in there, and like the way that the traditional financial system has layered all of this risk on top of each other is what creates risk for investors, especially when these companies, L2s, protocols, whatever, are marketing it as risk free, which some of them are. You've got these investors who are going in blind, and they're like, and all they hear is, oh, well, I'm being issuance is happening. Issuance is happening at an increasing rate, and so I've heard this narrative a lot more recently, which is, well, ETH is meant to be staked. You're supposed to stake ETH. That's what you're supposed to do with it. And that's not at all how ETH was intended. Like when it was built, we're seeing all of these second order effects come in and having to deal with them as they come in. And so to say that like we're not that Ethereum should not react to things to how the market is treating it because we're afraid that change will make us look capricious is it's just kind of hilarious to me, because it's like saying like, oh, we can't progress because we need to look like we need to look like we knew what we were doing in the first place. And it's like that is the antithesis of progress. That is the antithesis of making a technology better.
Well, no, I don't think that's really the crux of the argument, because it's not that, at least for me, it's not that, we're against change or we really even care what okay, I'm not gonna say that we don't care about what the SEC thinks, but I have publicly written that a change in issuance is not going to materially impact the SEC's thoughts on whether or not Ethereum is a security, because
Agreed.
Ethereum has literally changed issuance, like multiple times. The merge, EIP 1559, reducing block reports from 5 to 3 to 2. I mean, trust me, just talking about changes to issuance is not going to raise any alarm bells more than what has actually happened on the Ethereum and Ethereum's track record. So I don't think that's a strong. I agree with you that it's not something that should really worry people, or if you think about it, really logically makes sense. But I will say it's not. It's the fact that a change to issuance is not going to change how easy it is to stake. Changing your staking rewards from 5% to 4%, 4% to 3% probably isn't going to reduce that line of, the staking rate going up. And
But
and
you do
so
but you do agree, like, so if we offered a 20% yield, you do agree that right now ETH staked is a $400 billion market. 75% of that is unclaimed. If it's a 20% yield that we're offering, that's going to fill up faster than a 4% yield, right?
how much faster though? Like how, as
Good
in like
question.
if the line is going to keep going up and we know that, there's not a lot of yield anymore, do we know if people are going to actually stop staking if they're actually going to be able to get increased yield from restaking, which hasn't launched yet but will launch soon? It seems like a number, again, that is a little bit poorly thought out. It's not that there shouldn't be a change, but that the change that's being proposed, the logic behind it is we think this might help, and it's very clear that it probably will not change materially any of the staking dynamics that are currently on Ethereum.
Right. It will not change material of the staking dynamics. I do believe that it will slow stake down, because it does
Okay.
matter, especially for like institutional investors or traditional finance. It does matter. Tiny little percentages between like 3, 4, 5 do matter, because it matters whether or not it's beating other financial instruments in yield. And so whether or not like uh, disinterested in crypto money is going to flow in is going to matter on those very small percentages for sure. And a lot of this targeting talk is predicated on MEV burn being there, and so that's already going to drop the yield a couple percent from what we're seeing today. But I understand the hesitation to like the 30%. Like, why drop at 30%? I don't know, because we're trying to slow it down and we're trying to stem the bleed or trying to stem the
Okay.
influx.
I hear
Um,
you. I hear you. It's like a time like in the meanwhile, like as we try and figure this out, maybe this gives us more breathing room. Kind of like before a max EB, there was the limit to the churn of like, oh, okay, let's just do this really easy
which was
change to
also
the
really
churn limit.
controversial.
Oh, was it? I feel like that was an easier change because it didn't like specifically impact the income of stakers. It just impacted the influx of like how quickly new stakers could be added. And when that went into Deneb at the last minute, I was like, oh, I mean, I think that makes sense. But I hear you that, you know, this change to issue and this one-time change could be a way to create more runway, I guess, to figure things out.
I'm actually surprised that you supported that one, but not this one, because if you think about it, like that cap limit was a lot of the arguments that I was seeing against that, and were very similar to what I'm seeing right now, which is why eight? Why did you choose eight? Like, where does this number come from? You're just throwing it on, and like the EIPs that we're going to see in the future are going to solve this issue, and you're just adding tech debt for absolutely no reason. And it was something put forth by a few core devs really quickly, implemented really quickly, and there was this backlash of like, whoa, there's not even been any community discussion about this.
Okay, well, two things to that. Number one, the max EV, the validator growth set size, that was a real issue. That was a real problem. And that the network was already, there's too many messages flying around. This is critical to the health of Ethereum. Whereas this topic of like, oh my gosh, what if, you know, 100% of total ETH supply gets staked and goes to Lido? What is that? That's not a real problem. That is literally a theoretical problem that developers need to figure out, like need to think a little bit harder about. Like maybe the
What do you
solution, yeah.
what do you think is the difference between those two problems? Like the churn limit and the what you said that the too many messages flying around, like they're
Yes,
the
that's a real
validator set
problem.
getting too large.
Yes, that's a problem. This is a real problem because the network, protocol wise, cannot handle that many validators. It's
But
it
this is
what
the
the
same thing that this addresses. Is the validator
no,
set
no, no,
is getting too
no.
large.
Well, this is not the validator set size getting too large. This is too much ETH being staked and too much of that stake going to Lido.
But more ETH being staked means the validator set is increasing.
Not necessarily, because if the max EV increases to 2048, then, you know, you could just have larger validators. And so the
Right, that's
network's
true.
still healthy. Like the entire network still functions. There's still a small number of validators, but the total amount of ETH staked is very large. And developers hate the fact that all of this total ETH staked is going into, you know, smart contracts that, you know, it's not like it's in their purview, there's smart contract risk. And if that's what you're worried about, then maybe you have to enshrine a liquid staking solution, or maybe you have to do something else to penalize larger validators versus smaller validators. And so it's like, is the issuance like I don't really think that the change to the issuance is really all as urgent as the other one was. But I mean, I understand the slight correlation. I do see the connection a little bit.
Yeah, and I think honestly we're agreeing on most of the issues here on like what needs to be done, what needs to be implemented, and like how these changes need to be seen. Like there needs to be some sort of not just it doesn't need to be just one change. Like targeting is seems like a very good idea to me, but I also want to see more incentives like correlated offline penalties that would be
Agreed.
implemented into that, so that we're not just changing how much stake is going in, we're also changing what the composition and the value of that stake that is in there is, because right now we're not seeing a huge influx of new solo stakers. And that is going to be mostly liquid staking protocols. But I think what we disagree on is the timeline on which that is important. And so if we don't get into Electra, it doesn't happen this year or beginning of next year, whenever Electra happens. Osaka is the next one. Osaka is when it happens. And say we're at like, I think like the estimate was like 60 or 70% staked at that point. Um, people think of one of the things that I'm seeing is people were like are like, okay, well, say like Lido, EtherFi, Rocket Pool, they have like some vast majority of that stake. That's okay because we'll fight them and we have like this the power to socially slash them, or if they like fight the network wanting to lower the stake or target or whatever. But people neglect to understand, like to take into account that when the network is at that high stake, you're probably part of that system. Like it's
Yeah.
not just you against us against Lido. If Lido is integrated into everything, Rocket Pool, EtherFi, whatever the liquid staking protocols are at that point, they're integrated into everything. You have interest in them surviving, in them in their financial success. And so at that point, like the conversation becomes a lot more complicated and it becomes confusing for people because they don't know who the good guy is, they don't know who the bad guy is. And honestly, at that point we are rugging people. Like if a liquid staking protocol or an ETF bases its entire business model on the idea that we are going to have a 2.8% yield no matter what, or a 1.8% yield no matter what. Like even if we get to 100% stake, we're going to have 1.8% plus any MEV that happens. And then at that point, we tell them we're changing the issuance. Then not only are we changing the issuance, but we're fucking up a whole lot of people's businesses. And like that rugs them.
Mm, I don't.
And they're
I
going to fight
don't.
against it.
I
They're going
don't
to fight
agree.
hard against it.
Because, well, any people are building upon major business. I mean, there's billions of dollars worth of value on top of Ethereum, and Ethereum is a very experimental technology that is constantly changing. And I would kind of argue that all of the changes to issuance, all of the changes to consensus, all of the changes to Ethereum's scalability roadmap that has happened so far, those are all rugs because everyone built on Ethereum thinking that Ethereum was going to be the platform to build on, and now all the developers are like, get off our network, go to L2s.
Yeah.
And they didn't foresee the MEV stuff, so now everyone's like, oh, like come be a validator or be a miner on Ethereum. And then you have all the MEV Geth, you have MEV Boost. There's so much of Ethereum that is dependent on innovation that happens outside of the purview of Ethereum core developers. And so much value depends on MEV Boost, depends on Lido, depends on L2s. And I just feel like fixating on the fact that Lido is one of those dependencies. It's like it's all dependencies, and to some extent, like I think Ethereum developers need to wake up to the reality that like they do need to work more closely with all of these stakeholders, and now their bags are like inextricably like tied, meshed together with the bags of these major players.
Yeah. One thing I'll push back on is like you gave two examples. Like we changed from proof of work to proof of stake.
Yeah.
Um, we saw a huge pushback on that. There was a whole minor coalition that said that they weren't going to do this, they weren't going to support the upgrade. And part of the problem is they weren't really ETH holders, and like that helped because they got their ETH and then they sold it, and like miners didn't really have a stake in the network. Um, but the other one, businesses building on L1 and then being told to move to L2, that was a huge quality of life upgrade for them. Like the business as usual got a lot cheaper for them to operate. And they were able to offer cheaper transactions, cheaper whatever they were doing. They were able to offer that cheaper to their customers. And I
Hmm.
think that was a huge boost to those people. But like most tech upgrades that we have seen so far, if they have someone on the other side, we see a lot of pushback. And I think that we will see that pushback um, if we do this at Osaka at a much later date. And like, granted, I honestly think that if that needs to happen, if we don't get this into Electra, there's going to be a way to deal with that. There's going to be a way to deal with it to where if we implement something in Osaka, there can be like a ramp down procedure that
Mm-hmm.
says, we know this is going to disrupt a lot of people's plans, a lot of people's like businesses that were built on the staking yield. But what we can do is make all of these compromises to help you like off board or like there will be a plan. Either way, if we don't, if it doesn't get into Electra, if it just has to go into Osaka, I think it will be fine. I honestly think this is a real urgent problem to be dealing with, but either way, we're going to find a way to deal with it.
Either way, we're going to be okay. No, but I like it because it's true. And I think that I think there's also a high chance that, like, if it doesn't go into Electra, what would have gone into Electra, or like the reduction in issuance, it's going to look different in Osaka. Like, if it was a 30% reduction, then I feel like if we don't do it then in Osaka, it might be a little bit more of a proposal that, like, maybe is a little bit closer to the end game vision that does implement not just like a one-time reduction, but like offers some kind of more like long-term mechanism to figure things out, or adds things like the slashing, or sorry, not the slashing, but like the correlated offline penalty. I don't know. Like it might give Ethereum developers more pressure to like figure out a more robust solution too. But I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. And I think that was, I haven't finished. So the paper that Anders published on the first is a
We'll link to that in
30-page
the show
paper.
notes for
Yeah.
people to read.
I hope people do read it. I think probably like 8 people have read it so far.
Yeah, I'm
There,
definitely not one of those people.
I have been trying. I put it on my Kindle and I have been slowly trudging through it. And he like lists out 3 different options for curves in the future, and then like does all the math on them. But I think one of them is like a graduated change that goes towards the end game. But I'm not an expert on the paper. I haven't read the whole thing, so.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Ah, what a great conversation. I wanted to talk about MaxEV and PPS, but look at that. We are already out of time. We spent
Oh,
the
damn!
entire
It's
time
been.
debating issuance.
I
But
could,
I think it was useful. I mean, I feel like I understand a little bit more about the other side of the argument now.
I kind of like that every time we go through these discussions, we get so hung up on our first bullet point that we don't make it past any of the other ones.
Yes, but this is why I love it, because it's like I feel like our conversations are just so like they're just so honest. And I feel like I always understand what you're picking up and putting down, whereas I feel like sometimes the more technical conversations, it can be really hard to follow along. So,
Yeah, I mean it's a really unfortunate. I'm glad that we have people in the EF who are like this sort of stepwise, easy to understand to like hard to understand, and they like all try to help each other out and like trying to get their ideas out to the community. Because if it's too hard to understand, you literally don't get any buy-in, no engagement, no buy-in, no like discussion about it at all.
100%. It's handshake emoji all the way
Yeah,
through all the
yeah.
steps. Anyways, well, thank you so much, Nixo, for joining again on the Infinite Jungle. I hope everybody who watched this episode / listened to the episode enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, subscribe, and keep tuning back in for new episodes. We will be back again next week with more Infinite Jungle episodes covering the development and the evolution of Ethereum. Bye.
Thanks for having me, Christine.
I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes, and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities.